How's it going, everybody? This is Cameron White with White Light Astrology, and welcome back to your favorite weekly horoscope. What the fuck is going on in the universe? Thank you guys so much for being here and liking and sharing and commenting and subscribing. I love and appreciate every single one of you guys. This week we have a lot going on, and this week we're starting off with the lunar eclipse in Capricorn. And I know I'm not the only person talking about this. This is what everyone's talking about. This is a really, really big deal. This week we also have Venus conjoining the North Node and Venus opposing Saturn. Later on we will have Mercury retrogressing back into Cancer, as well as Mercury conjoining the Sun and going Cazimi. Now, this week is really important because we're ending the week, or I shouldn't say ending the week, we're ending eclipse season. Now, with this lunar eclipse in Capricorn that we're having, this is supposed to be a full moon, but this is where the light's getting cut out a little bit more. And I'm not really here to say that we're going to officially end eclipse season until we get to the new moon in Leo, because that will be the first lunation that we have that's not an eclipse. But this is kind of the end of it, but this is also the peak of it. And I really think with this week, with not only this lunar eclipse in Capricorn, but Venus making some not only a hard opposition to Saturn, but also conjoining the North Node, and then ending this week with Mercury retrogressing back into Cancer and going Cazimi, I think that there's going to be a lot of changes going on this week and a lot more answers and a little bit more clarity to give us better understanding of what's going on, so we can kind of move forward and realize what we need to do, and so we can do it. Starting off today on Monday, we had the moon enter Capricorn pretty early last night, and today it's going to later conjoin Saturn. Now, this is kind of not the biggest deal yet, but as the moon's approaching to be full, and if you go outside, you can see the moon right in between Saturn and Jupiter. It looks really, really pretty. While the moon's in Capricorn, and it's kind of like, you know, what needs to be established, what needs to have structure, where do we have to detach our emotions away from our investment into the experience, and where can we kind of detach ourselves so where we can get a handle on this situation, be a little bit more professional, and not be so emotionally invested and involved into it, so we can get the things done that we need to, because as you know, sometimes our emotions get in the way of doing the things that we need to get done. However, the moon is starting to fill up. It's starting to become full, and as it conjoins Saturn, I think this is really about understanding where our limitations, our barriers, our walls are being presented. Saturn is retrograde, so this isn't necessarily so much of an outside force, or you're like, you know, it's not like necessarily, what's a good way to put it? It's not like you're hitting a wall. It's kind of like the walls are coming in. It's kind of like, it rains diamonds on Saturn. Saturn has a lot of pressure. In order to create diamonds, if you want to create diamonds out of coal, you have to induce a lot of pressure. And now with the moon conjoining Saturn, while the moon's full and Saturn's retrograde, putting boundaries and rings around it, I think this is really about looking at, like, what pressure are we under here to, you know, have a better structure, have a better sense of, you know, ordinance, have a better sense of kind of like grip and, you know, reality and structure. Now, with Monday being, you know, the first of the week, starting this off, I kind of think that this is just kind of taking a very serious note as we begin the week. But as we move into Tuesday on July 16th, yeah, that's the 16th, that's when we'll have the lunar eclipse. Now, this is when the moon will be full, but it'll be partially cut out a little bit by the Earth, and it is conjoining Pluto. Now, this is this is supposed to be a full moon. This is supposed to be where we should be seeing where we need to apply better structures, have better, you know, sense of authority and discipline, maturity, X, Y, and Z. This is an eclipse, so it's kind of like there's a big emphasis on this full moon. And I really want to hit the emphasis on what needs to change. Because while Pluto is here in Capricorn, and we're realizing it's kind of like, you know, Saturn in Capricorn is kind of like, yeah, these old walls are old, but they still work. But Pluto in Capricorn is like, these walls and this foundation is old, it's crumbling, it's cracked, it's not working right, and we've built a structure on top of that not solid foundation. So it's not like we can just go underneath the building and redo the foundation. It's like we have to kind of be easy about this, and we have to realize that it's not, you know, as simple as just going in there, fixing the foundation. The structure will still be fine. We have to change the structure, or, you know, deassemble it in order to fix that foundation and build it from the ground up. And I think that this eclipse is really kind of like, hey, shit's not really working this well in this fashion. And it's not just some basic changes that you can make throughout your day that will eventually help you. This is kind of like changing our foundation, but it's, again, not as easy as just going in and changing it. We got to take down the structure first, then do the foundation. And so with this being a full moon too, I think this is just about realizing what needs to change and realizing that that change is foundational. That change is very much cemented inside. That change is very inner. It's very big, and not necessarily big as in your whole life's going to change, but you may notice that during this week things will come up to where you start changing your mind about certain things and start making different decisions and start making different choices and taking different actions that later on lead into very big and different results versus if you never made these changes or never chose something different. Also, on Tuesday on the 16th, that's when we're going to have Venus opposed Saturn. And this is important because, I talked about this in my monthly horoscopes, but Venus is in Cancer. This is really valuing, protection, this is valuing being close and empathizing and really valuing what matters. What do we need? What is the necessity? And as Venus is in Cancer opposing Saturn, this is kind of like, we may be valuing these specific needs, but realistically, we're not going to be able to obtain those until we handle this first. And it's kind of like a catch-22, like even though you're going to want to channel that Venus in Cancer, like this is what I want to do, I want to value this is what I'm feeling, this is what I'm going towards, I want to protect this, I want to take care of this, I value this. Saturn saying, if you really want to put the value, if you really want to put the love into that thing that you want, whatever Venus in Cancer is representing for you in your life, you've got to understand that the structure around how and why you're doing that needs to change first. Saturn in Capricorn, it's retrograde. This is like, sometimes like we can have, it's kind of like a business plan. When you first start a business and you have your business plan for the first 1 or 5 years, it works pretty well. But if you're still using the same business plan from your first year of business till your 20th year of business, you may not have a successful business. You've got to be able to change your outline and change your structure. And I think that's what Venus opposing Saturn is about, is like, if you really want to start valuing this more, you've got to change the structure of it on an internal level. Now, as we do go into Wednesday on July 17th, that's when we're going to have the moon enter Aquarius. We're finally out of that gnarly moon in Capricorn transit. And as the moon goes into Aquarius, this is still, a Saturn-ruled sign. There's a lot of maturity and authenticity and authority here. There's a lot of seriousness. But it's in an air sign, so it's a lot more logical. It can breathe. It can think a lot more flowly or clearly rather than Saturn and Capricorn's just like reading by the rule book and going off that. The moon in Aquarius is kind of helping us connect the dots in a better way, get a little bit more creative, and not in the fun sense, but more of how can we fix this problem? How can we be more solution-oriented? Now, also on Wednesday, that's when we're going to have Venus conjoin the North Node, and I talked a lot about that in my monthly horoscopes because the North Node, like Rahu, the dragon's head, very hungry, very much like this is where we're feeling pulled towards, and it's like we can't help but feel called and compelled to go in this direction and to focus on this area, whether that's by choice or not by choice. And while Venus is coming up onto this North Node area where we're feeling so called and compelled to keep moving forward in, Venus is like, I even though it just got beat up by Saturn, it's still going to get beat up by Pluto. It's still seeing the value in taking that direction and in going in that direction. And this is Venus. What are we connecting to? What are we showing value to? What are we wanting to express and indulge more in? And this is in the sign of Cancer, so this turns out to be things like, relating, being more sentimental, protecting and nurturing. And, this can be a little bit defensive. Venus in Cancer, it's, like you don't mess with, it's kind of like if you're out in the woods and you see a grizzly bear, that's fine. Maybe not, but when you see like a grizzly bear and then like 2 or 3 cubs next to the grizzly bear, you're in some deep shit. Like you don't fuck with a mom and you don't fuck with its babies. Like Venus in Cancer is kind of like that same thing. Not necessarily that it's so much acting out on it, but there's a protection there. There's a defense mechanism there, and it's kind of powerful. Now, with Venus being in Cancer on top of the North Node as we go into Wednesday, I think this is just going to be an important time to realize, this isn't the end. This is more of the beginning And while, Venus is opposing Saturn, we just got off these eclipses. I think this is about, again, how I just said with the moon in Aquarius, connecting more of the dots. I think this is about connecting more of the dots about how we can get to our destination. And that's part of the journey. And that destination is what Venus in Cancer on top of the North Node is going to be showing you guys. But then, as we go into Thursday on July 18th, we don't have too much going on. We do have the moon sextiling Jupiter. And so while the moon's in Aquarius, still helping us connect all the dots, see a bigger picture, get a different perspective of things, while it's starting to apply to a sextile to Jupiter. And it will also oppose Mars, but I'm not really too concerned about that. As it sextiles Jupiter, I think this is about opening up a bigger picture. This is Jupiter in Sagittarius, This is what does everything philosophically mean for us? What do we believe about these things? And what does that mean moving forward? And so as the moon's in Aquarius, kind of connecting all of the dots, you can't help but to have this sense of, deep meaning and reason over all this. And this is just a sextile, but I think Jupiter's influence of wanting to expand the why and why we think and the reasoning behind it, I think this is kind of helping us see a bigger picture, and also not necessarily to see, not everything's going to be positive, not everything's going to be, the best thing in the world, but I do think that this is a good opportunity to start asking the right questions to lead to that positive result that we all kind of want. But then on Friday, on July 20th, or on July 19th, my bad, that's when we're going to have Mercury retrogress back into Cancer, and this is going to be kind of not the weirdest thing, but while Mercury was in Leo, I don't know if you guys have been paying attention to what's going on social media. That's a dumb question. You guys are all on your phones all day long. If you haven't but noticed, Mercury in Leo has been kind of loud. I mean, just fights on, social media. This Mercury retrograde was conjoining Uranus, conjoining Mars and squaring Uranus. But as Mercury goes back into Cancer, I think this is where things start to get a little bit more, not necessarily so out in the open, in the spotlight, like how Leo likes it to be, but more behind closed doors and more private conversations. And while Mercury is retrograde in Cancer, I think this is not so much about getting our egos bruised or, how I talked about my Mercury retrograde video. I really went on about the whole idea of, reimagining ourselves, redefining ourselves. While Mercury goes back into Cancer, I think this is about really focusing analytically and logically about what matters the most. What do we need to take care of? And that doesn't always mean, don't get me wrong, take care of your bills, make sure you have food on your plate and whatnot. But I think this is about, for you in the long run and in your life, what do you want? What do you need? And what does that look like in the terms of expression, in the terms of saying everything? And while Mercury is retrograding, this isn't we're going to have definitive pinpoint answers right now. This is just more about looking back and saying, what do I need for myself right now? Also on Friday, that's when we're going to have the moon enter Pisces. And, this gives us an opportunity to kind of feel everything out in an authentic way and in a, there's no rules, there's no boundaries, there's no right or wrong way to feel feelings. And while the moon is in Pisces, I think this gives us a better opportunity to be more, open and real and honest with that. While the moon's in Pisces, it's super easy to detach away from things and check out and not be super involved because, you're so influenced by your environment and the people and the things that are surrounding you. But while the moon enters Pisces on Friday, give this, moon transit, this lunar transit, a couple days to kind of think about everything, to feel everything out. Then on Saturday, on July 20th, that's when we're going to have the moon starting to apply to a square with Jupiter and a conjunction with Neptune. But that's really about it. And the one thing I wanted to hit about that is while the moon's in Pisces trying to figure everything else out, it will be squaring Jupiter. And Jupiter is still retrograde. It is about to go direct here in a couple weeks, though. But, Jupiter retrograde in Sagittarius is kind of like, hey, I'm having deep, compelling thoughts about my beliefs and why I believe them and what does it all mean. And the moon in Pisces is kind of like, I can't handle a bunch of confusion already. And so while the moon's in Pisces starting to square Jupiter, I think what's important is, again, not everything needs to be pinpoint definitive right now. What needs to happen is asking the right questions, because asking the right questions is going to create the right answers. Now, while the moon's in Pisces and we're feeling everything out, seeing what we believe, what we don't believe, what works for us, what doesn't work for us, and it starts to square Jupiter, don't be afraid to, you may be feeling something that goes against your beliefs. That's not really in line with it, and that's okay. But I think this is an important time to feel that feeling. So then as we have that experience, we can use that for a later date, which I think is just going to be this weekend and next Monday. But as we get into this weekend, we have Saturday moon squaring Jupiter. Then on Sunday, that's when we're going to have the moon starting to conjoin Neptune. This is when things get a little bit more blurry, a little bit more confusing, but also at the same time, if you just learn to be a little bit more in tune with yourself, in tune with this world, in tune with your conscious, it can be really easy to check out, be out on your own and be, completely confused when the moon's conjoining Neptune. But it can also be a really good time to just be in touch with yourself and feel what you feel, believe what you believe, and just get spiritual for a second. So while the moon conjoins Neptune, it will be starting to trine Venus and Mercury, and I think this is giving us a better push towards this Venus in Cancer stuff and Mercury retrograde in Cancer, where, we're realizing what we value, or valuing our needs, valuing our protection, valuing what matters the most and the sentimental. Mercury's retrograding in Cancer, where it's we're rethinking about all this stuff, revisiting it, and it's time to start actually having the discussion and the talk. I think the moon in Pisces kind of, helps encourage us to have those conversations and to say the things that we need to say. But also on Sunday, that's when we're going to have Mercury conjoin the sun and go Cazimi. And this is important because while Mercury's retrograde and things are still a little bit confusing, once it conjoins the sun and it's at its closest distance between the earth and the sun, this is when things start to make a little bit more sense. This is when things start to go, okay, this is what matters and this is what doesn't matter. This is how I feel and this is what I need to say versus this isn't really worth saying and I don't really need to get this point across because I'm going to do whatever I want to do regardless of how people feel anyway. But as Mercury conjoins the sun, this is just going to be a really good time to get a clear look at everything. And that may not exactly be positive, but getting a clearer picture of what it looks like, just because it's a clear picture doesn't mean it's a good picture. But getting a clear sense of what's going on and what it's going to look like as we move forward is going to help you guys start to take the action steps necessary to start, whether Mercury retrograde messed up your plans or so far you haven't been affected by Mercury retrograde. You'll start to see the stuff later on as we move on with the rest of the year, basically. But then as we get into Monday on July 22nd, that's when we'll have the moon enter Aries, where it'll later start to trine not only Mars, but Jupiter as well. But the biggest thing about Monday on July 22nd, it's my birthday. So yes, I'm not a Cancer. I am a 0-degree Leo. I was born on a leap year. You are not a cusp sign. Cusp signs don't exist. And you're hearing that from a cusp sign himself. Now, wish me a happy birthday or you'll have 1,000 years of bad luck. I'm just kidding. Don't worry. But anyway, Monday, by the time we get to this next video, we'll have the moon in Aries. This is feeling a little bit more charged up, a little bit more progressive, a little bit more direct with what we're doing. But as we get into next week, that's when we'll have the sun enter Leo. That's when we're going to have Mars trine Jupiter. Mercury's going to conjoin Venus. And then later on, Venus is going to enter Leo as well. And so next week is when we start seeing the ball rolling on things getting a little bit more positive, things getting a little bit more progressive, things starting to grow and build and inflate with all this fire that we've got going on. So my biggest advice is get through this week. Take it seriously. But as we get into next week, when things starting to get better, you'll be appreciative of what you went through this week. So with that being said, thank you guys so much for being here and liking and sharing and commenting and subscribing. I love and appreciate every single one of you, and I'll be seeing you next week.